Universe Books. Answers about life. Universe Books presents The Law and the Promise by Neville Goddard, 1961. Chapter 10. Things which do not appear. What is seen was made out of things which do not appear. Hebrews 11, verse 3. Human history, with its forms of governments, its revolutions, its wars, and in fact the rise and fall of nations, could be written in terms of the rise and fall of ideas implanted in the minds of men. Herbert Hoover. The secret of imagining is the greatest of all problems, to the solution of which the mystic aspires. Supreme power, supreme wisdom, supreme delight, he, in the far-off solution of this mystery. Douglas Fawcett. To refuse to recognize the creative power of man's invisible imaginal activity, is too great to be argued with. Man, through his imaginal activity, literally calls into existence the things that do not exist. By man's imaginal activity, all things are made, and without such activity, was not anything made that was made. Such causal activity could be defined as an imaginal assemblage of images, which occurring, some physical event invariably takes place. It is for us to assemble the images of happy outcome and then keep from interfering. The event must not be forced, but allowed to happen. If imagination is the only thing that acts, or is, in existing beings or men, as Blake believed, then we should never be certain that it was not some woman treading in the winepress who began that subtle change in men's minds. This grandmother is daily treading the winepress for her little granddaughter. She writes, "This is one of those things that make my family and friends say, we just don't understand it." Kim is 2.5 years old now. I took care of her for a month after she was born and did not see her again until a year ago, and then, only for 2 weeks. However, during this past year every day I have taken her on my lap, in my imagination, and cuddled her and talked to her. In these imaginal acts I go over all the wonderful things about Kim: God is growing through me, God is loving through me, etc. At first, I would get the response of a very young child. When I started "God is growing through me," she would reply me. Now, as I start she completes the whole sentence. Another thing that has happened is, as the months have passed, as I take her on my lap, in my imagination, she has grown constantly larger and heavier. Kim hasn't even seen a picture of me in this past year. At the most, I could only be a name to her. Now, sometime each day, her family tells me, she starts talking about me, to no one in particular, just talking. Sometimes it goes on for an hour, or she goes to the phone and pretends to call. In her monologue, are such bits as, "My DD loves me. My DD always comes to see me every day." Even though I know what I have been doing in my imagination, it has caused me, to wonder much. UK. All imaginative men and women are forever casting forth enchantments, and all passive men and women, who have no powerful imaginative lives, are continually passing under the spell of their power. There is no form in nature which is not produced by, and sustained by some imaginal activity. Therefore, any change in the imaginal activity must result in a corresponding change in form. To imagine a substitute image for unwanted or defective content, is to create it. If only we persist in our ideal imaginal activity, and do not let lesser satisfactions suffice, ours shall be the victory. When I read in Seed Time and Harvest the story of the school teacher who, through her imagination, in daily revision, transformed a delinquent pupil into a lovely girl, I decided to do something about a young boy in my husband's school. To tell all the problems involved, would take pages, for my husband has never had such a difficult child nor such a trying parent situation. The lad was too young to be expelled, yet the teachers refused to have him in their classes. To make matters worse, the mother and grandmother literally camped on the school grounds making trouble for everyone. I wanted to help the boy, but I also wanted to help my husband. So, nightly, I constructed two scenes in my imagination. 1. I saw a perfectly normal happy child. 2. I heard my husband say, "I can't believe it, dear, but do you know R is acting like a normal boy now, and it is heaven not having those two women around." After 2 months of persisting in my imaginal play, night after night, my husband came home and said, "It's like heaven around school," not exactly the same words but close enough for me. The grandmother had become involved in something that took her out of town and the mother had to accompany her. At the same time a new teacher had welcomed the challenge of R, and he was progressing wonderfully well into all I imagined for him. GB. It is useless to hold standards that we do not apply. Unlike Portia, who said, "I can easier teach 20 what were good to be done, than be one of the 20 to follow mine own teaching." GB followed her own teaching. It is fatally easy to make the acceptance of the imaginal faith a substitute for living by it. He has sent me to bind up the broken-hearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. Isaiah 61, verse 1. Chapter 11. The Potter. Arise, and go down to the potter's house, and there I will let you hear my words. So, I went down to the potter's house, and there he was working at his wheel. And the vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hand, and he reworked it into another vessel, as it seemed good to the potter to do. Jeremiah 18, verses 2-4. The word translated potter means imagination. Out of material others would have thrown away as useless, an awakened imagination refashions it as it ought to be. O Lord, thou art our Father, we are the clay, and thou art our potter, we are all the work of thy hand. Isaiah 64, verse 8. This conception of creation as a work of imagination, and the Lord, our Father, as our imagination, will take us further into the mystery of creation than any other guide. The only reason people do not believe in this identity of God and human imagination, is that they are unwilling to assume the responsibility for their frightful misuse of imagination. Divine imagination has descended to the level of human imagination, that human imagination may ascend to divine imagination. The 8th Psalm says that man was made a little lower than God, not a little lower than the angels, as the King James Version mistakenly translates it. Angels are the emotional dispositions of man, and are therefore his servant, and not his superior, as the author of Hebrews tells us. Are not all angels ministering spirits, sent to serve those who will inherit salvation? Hebrews 1, verse 14. Imagination is the real man and is one with God. Imagination creates, conserves and transforms. Imagination is radically creative when all imaginative activity based on memory disappears. Imagination is conservative when its imaginal activity is fed with images supplied mainly by memory. Imagination is transformative, when it varies a theme already in being, when it mentally alters a fact of life, when it leaves the fact out of the remembered experience or puts something in its place, if it upsets the harmony it desires. Through the use of her imagination this talented young artist has made her dream a reality. Ever since I entered into the art field, I have enjoyed doing sketches and paintings for children's rooms. However, I have been discouraged by advisors and friends who were far more experienced in the field than I. They liked my work, admired my talent, but said I would not get recognition nor pay for this type of work. Somehow, I always felt I would, but how? Then last fall I heard your lectures and read your books, and I decided to let my imagination create the reality I desired. This is what I did daily. I imagined I was in a gallery, there was a great deal of excitement about me, on the walls, hung my art, only mine, a one-woman show, and I saw red stars on many of the pictures. This would indicate that they had been sold. This is what happened. Just before Christmas, I did a mobile for a friend, who showed it in turn to a friend of hers who owns an art import shop in Pasadena. He expressed a desire to meet me, so I took a few samples of my work along. When he looked at the very first painting, he said he would like to give me a one-woman show in the spring. The night of the opening, April 17th, an interior decorator came and liked, and commissioned me to do a collage for a little boy's room, which will appear in the September issue of Good Housekeeping, for the 1961 House of the Year. Later, during the showing, another decorator came and admired my work so much, that he asked if he might arrange for me to meet the right interior decorators, and the right owners of galleries, who would buy and display my work properly. Incidentally, the show was a financial success for the owner of the gallery as well as for me. The interesting thing about this, is that seemingly these three men came to me out of the blue. Certainly, I made no effort during the time of my imagining to contact anyone, but, now, I am getting recognition and have a market for my work. And now, I know without a shadow of doubt, that there is no, when you seriously apply this principle that imagining creates reality. GL. She tested the potter, and proved his creativity in performance. Only the indolent mind would fail to rise to this challenge. Paul states, "The Spirit of God dwells in you, now, examine yourselves to see whether you are holding to your faith." Test yourselves. Do you not realize that Jesus Christ is in you? Unless indeed, you fail to meet the test. I hope you will find out that we have not failed. 2 Corinthians 13, verses 5 and 6. If all things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made, it should not be difficult for man to test himself to find out who this Creator in himself is. The test will prove to man that his imagination is the one, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. Romans 4, verse 17. The potter's presence in us is inferred from what he does there. We cannot see him there, as one not ourselves. The nature of the potter, Jesus Christ, is to create, and there is no creation without him. Every recorded story in this book is just such a test, as Paul asked the Corinthians to make. God really and truly exists in man, in every human being. God wholly becomes us. He is not our virtue but our real selves, our imagination. The following illustrations from the mineral world, may help us to see how supreme imagining and human imagining could be one and the same power, and yet be vastly different in their creativity. Diamond is the world's hardest mineral. Graphite, used in lead pencils, is one of the softest. Yet both minerals are pure carbon. The vast difference in the properties of the two forms of carbon is believed to be caused by a different arrangement of the carbon atoms. But whether the difference is produced by a different arrangement of the carbon atoms or not, all agree that diamond and graphite are one substance, pure carbon. The purpose of life is the creative realization of desire. Man, lacking desire, could not exist efficiently in a world of continuous problems requiring continuing solutions. A desire is an awareness of something we lack or need to make life more enjoyable. Desires always have some personal gain in view. The greater the anticipated gain, the more intense the desire. There is no really unselfish desire. Even when our desire is for another, we are still seeking to gratify desire. To attain our desire, we should imagine scenes implying their fulfillment, and enact the scene in our imagination, if only momentarily, with a joy sufficiently felt within its limits to make it natural. It is like a child dressing up and playing queen. We must imagine we are what we would like to be. We must play it in imagination first, not as a spectator, as an actor. This lady imaginatively played queen, by being where she wanted to be in her imagination. She was the true actor in this theater. My desire was to attend a matinee performance of a famous pantomimist, currently playing in one of the largest theaters of our city. Because of the intimate nature of this art, I wanted to sit in the orchestra, but I didn't have even the price of a balcony ticket. The night I determined to have this pleasure for myself, in my imagination, I fell asleep watching the wondrous performer. In my imaginal act, I sat in an orchestra center seat, heard the applause as the curtain rose and the artist came on stage, and I actually felt the intense excitement of this experience. The next day, the day of the matinee performance, my financial condition had not changed. I had exactly $1.37 in my purse. I knew I must use the dollar to buy gas for my car, which would leave me with 37 cents, but I also knew I had faithfully slept in the feeling of being at that performance, so I dressed myself for the theater. While changing articles from one purse to another, I found a dollar bill and 45 cents in change, hidden in the pocket of my seldom-used opera purse. I grinned to myself, realizing that gasoline money had been given to me, so would the balance of my theater ticket be given to me. Gaily, I finished dressing, and left for the theater. Standing before the ticket window, my confidence dwindled as I gazed at the prices, and saw $3.75 for orchestra seats. With a feeling of dismay, I turned away quickly and walked across the street to a cafe for a cup of tea. I had spent 16 cents on my tea before I remembered seeing the price of balcony seats on the ticket window list. Hurriedly, I counted my change and found I had $1.66 left. Running back to the theater, I bought the cheapest seat available, which cost $1.55. With 1 dime left in my purse, I went through the entrance, and the usher tore my ticket in half, saying, "Upstairs left, please." The performance was about to begin, but ignoring the usher's instructions, I walked into the main floor ladies' restroom. Still determined to sit in the orchestra section, I sat down, closed my eyes and kept my inward sight riveted on the stage from the direction of the orchestra. At that moment, a group of women walked into the restroom, all talking at once, but I heard only one conversation as a woman speaking to her companion, said, "But I waited and waited until the last moment. Then she called and said she couldn't make it. I would have given her ticket away, but it's too late now." Not realizing it, I handed the usher both tickets, and he tore them in half before I could stop him. I almost laughed aloud. Getting up, I walked over to this lady and asked if I might use the extra ticket she had instead of the balcony seat I had bought. She was charming and kindly invited me to join her party. The ticket she handed me was for the orchestra section, center seat, 6 rows from the stage. I sat in that seat only moments before the curtain rose, on a performance I had witnessed the night before, from that seat, in my imagination. Jr. We must actually be, in imagination. It is one thing to think of the end, and another thing to think from the end. To think from the end, to enact the end, is to create reality. The inner actions must correspond to the actions we would physically perform after these things should be. To live wisely, we must be aware of our imaginal activity, and see to it that it is faithfully shaping the end we desire. The world is clay, our imagination is the potter. We should always imagine ends that are of value or promise well. He who desires but acts, not breeds pestilence. What's done flows from what's imagined. Outward forms reveal the imaginings of man. Man is the shuttle, to whose winding quest and passage, through these looms God ordered motion, but ordained no rest. I run a small business, solely owned, and a few years ago it seemed that my venture would end in failure. For some months, sales had fallen steadily and I found myself in a financial jam, along with thousands of other small businessmen, as this period spanned one of our country's minor recessions. I was badly in debt and needed at least $3,000 almost immediately. My auditors advised me to close my doors and try to salvage what I could. Instead, I turned to my imagination. I knew your teaching but had never actually attempted to solve any problem in this manner. I was frankly skeptical of the entire idea that imagination can create reality, but I was also desperate, and desperation forced me to test your teaching. I imagined my office receiving $4,000 unexpectedly in remittances due. This money would have to come from new orders, as my accounts receivable were practically non-existent, but this seemed far-fetched, as I hadn't received this much in sales during the last 4 months or more. Nevertheless, I kept my imaginal picture of receiving this amount of money steadily before me for 3 days. Early the 4th morning, a customer I had not heard from in months, called me on the telephone, asking me to come and see him personally. I was to bring a quotation previously given him for machinery needed by his factory. The quotation was months old, but I dug it out of my files and lost no time in arriving at his office that day. I wrote out the order which he signed, but I saw no immediate help for me in the transaction, as the equipment he wanted would take from 4 to 6 months for factory delivery, and of course, my customer did not have to pay for it until delivered. I thanked him for the order and rose to leave. He stopped me at the door and handed me a check for a little over $4,000, saying, "I want to pay for the merchandise now, in advance, for tax purposes, you know." "You don't mind?" No, I didn't mind. I realized what had happened the moment I took that check into my hands. Within 3 days my imaginal act had done for me what I hadn't been able to do in months of desperate financial shuffling. I know, now, that imagination could have brought $40,000 into my business just as easily as 4,000s. LNC. O Lord, Thou art our Father, we are the clay, and Thou art our potter, we are all the work of Thy hand. Chapter 12. Attitudes. Mental things are alone real, what is called corporeal. Nobody knows of its dwelling place, it is in fallacy, and its existence in imposture. Where is the existence out of mind or thought? Where is it but in the mind of a fool? Blake. Memory, though faulty, is adequate to the call for sameness. If we remember another as we have known him, we recreate him in that image, and the past will be recognized in the present. Imagining creates reality. If there is room for improvement, we should reconstruct him with new content, visualize him as we would like him to be, rather than have him bear the burden of our memory of him. Everything possible to be believed is an image of truth. The following story is by one who believes that imagining creates reality, and acting on this belief, changed his attitude toward a stranger, and bore witness to this change in reality. More than 20 years ago, when I was a green farm boy newly arrived in Boston, to attend school, a panhandler asked me for money for a meal. Although the money I had was pitifully insufficient for my own needs, I gave him what was in my pocket. A few hours later the same man, by this time staggering drunk, stopped me again and asked for money. I was so outraged, to think the money I could so ill afford, had been put to such use, I made myself a solemn pledge that I would never again listen to the plea of a street beggar. Through the years I kept my pledge, but every time I refused anyone, my conscience needled me. I felt guilty even to the point of developing a sharp pain in my stomach, but I couldn't bring myself to unbend. The early part of this year, a man stopped me as I was walking my dog and asked for money so he could eat. True to the old pledge, I refused him. His manner was gracious as he accepted my refusal. He even admired my dog, and spoke of a family in New York State he knew that raised Cocker Spaniels. This time my conscience was really pricking me. As he went on his way, I determined to remake that scene as I wished it had been, so I stopped right there on the street, closed my eyes for only a few moments and enacted the scene differently. In my imagination I had the same man approach me, only this time he opened the conversation by admiring my dog. After we had talked a moment, I had him say, "I don't like to ask you this, but I really need something to eat. I have a job that begins tomorrow morning, but I've been out of work and tonight I'm hungry." I then reached into my imaginary pocket, pulled out an imaginary $5 bill and gladly gave it to him. This imaginal act immediately dissolved the guilty feeling and the pain. I know from your teaching that an imaginal act is fact, so I knew I could grant anyone what he asked and by faith in the imaginal act, consent to the reality of his having it. 4 months later as I was again walking my dog, the same man approached me and opened the conversation by admiring my dog. "Here's a beautiful dog," he said. "Young man, I don't suppose you remember me, but a while back I asked you for some money and you very kindly said no. I say kindly, because if you had given it to me I would still be asking for money. Instead, I got a job that very next morning, and now I'm on my feet and have some self-respect again." I knew his job was a fact when I imagined it that night some 4 months before, but I won't deny there was immense satisfaction in having him appear in the flesh to confirm it. FB. I have no silver and gold, but I give you what I have. Acts 3, verse 6. None is to be discarded, all must be saved, and our imagination reshaping memory is the process whereby the salvation is brought to pass. To condemn the man for having lost his way, is to punish the already punished. Oh, whom should I pity, if I pity not the sinner who is gone astray? Not what the man was, but what he may become, should be our imaginal activity. Don't you remember sweet Alice, Ben Bolt, sweet Alice whose hair was so brown, who wept with delight when you gave her a smile, and trembled with fear at your frown? If we imagine no worse of him than he of himself, he would pass as excellent. It's not the man at his best, but the imaginist exercising the spirit of forgiveness that performs the miracle. Imagining with new content transformed both the man who asked and the man who gave. Imagining has not yet had its due in the systems either of moralists or educators. When it does, there will be the opening of the prison to those who are bound. Nothing has existence for us save through the memory we have of it, therefore we should remember it not as it was, unless of course, it was altogether desirable, but as we desire it to be. Inasmuch as imagining is creative, our memory of another either furthers or hinders him, and makes his upward or downward way easier and swifter. There is no coal of character so dead that it will not glow and flame if but slightly turned. The following story shows that imagining can make rings, and husbands, and move people to China. My husband, child of a broken home and raised by beloved grandparents, was never close to his mother, nor she to him. A woman of 63 and a divorcee for 32 of those years, she was lonely and embittered, and my relationship with her was strained as I attempted to stay in the middle. By her own admission, her great desire was to remarry for companionship, but she believed this to be impossible at her age. My husband would often state to me that he hoped she would remarry, and as he fervently put it, perhaps live way out of town. I had the same wish, and, as I put it, perhaps move to China. Being wary of my personal motive for this wish, I knew I must change my feeling toward her in my imaginal drama, and at the same time, give her what she wanted. I began by seeing her in my imagination as a completely changed personality, a happy joyous woman, secure and contented in a new relationship. Every time I thought of her, I would see her mentally as a new woman. About 3 weeks later, she came to our house for a visit bringing a friend she had met many months previously. The man had recently become a widower, he was her age, secure financially and had grown children and grandchildren. We liked him and I was excited because it was obvious they liked each other. But my husband still thought it was impossible. I didn't. From that day on, every time her image rose in my mind, I saw her extending her left hand toward me, and I admired the ring on her finger. 1 month later, she and her friend came to visit us, and as I walked forward to greet them, she proudly extended her left hand. The ring was on her finger. 2 weeks later she was married, and we haven't seen her since. She lives in a brand new home, way out of town, and as her new husband dislikes the long drive to our house, she might as well have moved to China. JB. There is a wide difference between the will to resist an activity, and the decision to change it. He who changes an activity acts, whereas he who resists an activity, reacts. One creates, the other perpetuates. Nothing is real beyond the imaginative patterns we make of it. Memory, no less than desire, resembles a daydream. Why make it a daymare? Man can forgive only if he treats memory as a daydream, and shapes it to his heart's desire. RK learned that we may rob others of their abilities by our attitudes toward them. He changed his attitude and thereby changed a fact. I am not a money lender nor am I in the investment business as such, but a friend and business acquaintance came to me for a substantial loan in order to expand his plant. Because of personal friendship, I granted the loan with reasonable interest rates, and gave my friend the right of renewal at the end of 1 year. When the first year term expired, he was behind in his interest payments and requested a 30-day extension on the note. I granted this request, but at the end of 30 days he was still unable to meet the note and asked for an additional extension. As I previously stated, I am not in the business of lending money. Within 20 days I needed full payment of the loan to meet debts of my own. But I consented again to extend the note although my own credit was now in serious jeopardy. The natural thing to do was to apply legal pressure to collect, and a few years ago, I would have done just that. Instead, I remembered your warning not to rob others of their ability, and I realized that I had been robbing my friend of his ability to pay what he owed. For 3 nights I constructed a scene in my imagination in which I heard my friend tell me that unexpected orders had flooded his desk so rapidly, he was now able to pay the loan in full. The 4th day I received a telephone call from him. He told me that by what he called a miracle he had received so many orders, and big ones too, he was now able to pay back my loan including all interest due, and, in fact, had just mailed a check to me for the entire amount. RK. There is nothing more fundamental to the secret of imagining than the distinction between imagining and the state imagined. Mental things are alone real. Everything possible to be believed is an image of truth. Congratulations, you have finished this 4th part of this book. You must have a definite purpose in your life. You know that you can do it. You are almost there. The final revelation is waiting for you. Listen the last video now. Please, share an insight that this book brought to you. Your point of view may help a lot of people. The future depends on what you do today. Gandhi. Remember to download your ebook PDF and to subscribe as well. Thank you, we will meet again.